And all guests on 95.7 The Game appear on the River Islands guest line. Isn't it time for you to discover the islands, River Islands in Lathrop? And that does include the good doc when he joins us on Cleared to Play, where we take you inside the tent and get you updated on the latest injuries in the Bay. Proud to partner with UCSF Health on this segment and bring in Dr. Brian Feeley. Doc, welcome in. Thanks for joining us as always. How you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
We're doing good, although probably a little better than the 49ers because they have all this Ayuk drama, this Trent Williams drama, and they also have a number of injuries that they're dealing with, including a couple as a result of their first preseason game. Doc, Kalia Davis, a reserve defensive lineman who the Niners probably were going to have to rely on early in the year as a reserve run stopper and pass rusher, actually had a pretty good game on Saturday in Tennessee, had the team's only sack, but Kyle Shanahan comes out yesterday and says that he needs to get a procedure done on his knee, essentially a knee scope, because there's some stuff hanging out around his kneecap, and he might miss upwards of half of the season. Can you give us any insight? It's kind of a generic explanation. What do you think Kalia Davis is going through right now?
Yeah, I mean, most likely he's got some pain and swelling from some unstable cartilage underneath his kneecap. Now, a lot of people tolerate that just fine. So if we look at older people over the age of 45, 55, most people have some fraying in their cartilage, but they're also not loading their knee, getting down into a 3-point or 4-point stance and trying to explode up out of that position. When you think about what a defensive lineman has to do, getting in that loaded position, essentially doing a squat over and over, and then pushing, you're putting a lot of shear force on your kneecap. So any unstable cartilage in that area can cause pain and it can cause swelling. So the plan most likely is to go in, clean up all the frayed cartilage, get it back to a stable edge so it's not bothering the rest of his knee. It makes sense if he's been having some pain and swelling for a while. Keep in mind, he also had a torn ACL when he was at Central Florida. To really shut him down, let him recover slowly so he doesn't have multiple small setbacks along the way.
That's brutal. You know, when those repeat injuries happen in your knee, the same knee, it can really be deleterious or negative for the overall structure. Amry Thomas with a broken forearm, that seems like a pretty garden variety break, but why, Doc, is this such a bad break that it may cost him the majority of his time?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where the break is. The closer it is to the joint, the more conservative we have to be. So if you have, for instance, if you break right down by the wrist, sometimes that fracture can go into the actual wrist joint. We have to go a lot slower compared to if you break right in the middle of your forearm. Those are the type that you can often see players getting back in 4 to 6 weeks with a hard cast. So depending on where the injury is, what else is associated with the injury, that really dictates the time to return to sport. Bones themselves heal pretty quick. Once we plate them, it takes about 6 weeks to heal. Not that much longer for athletes to get back into shape and to be able to work on their range of motion unless it's around a joint. So the likelihood is it's closer to one of the joints, either his elbow or his wrist, and that's going to slow him down a little.
Looking for a little bit of good news when it relates to the 49ers, Doc, and that is Talanoa Huanga, who, of course, has been out for a long time, suffered a torn ACL midway through last season and has been rehabbing it all offseason. Kyle Shanahan said yesterday that he's going in for another checkup on Thursday of this week, so in a couple of days. Where should Huanga be at this point of his rehab, and when might Niner fans expect him to be back out there on the field and contributing to the team again?
So he was injured last November, so we're looking at about 8 to 8.5 months out right now. So he should be getting to the point where, for most timelines, he can practice on his own. He's doing cutting. He's getting well-conditioned, and he can probably start thinking about getting into games right around 9 months. We know that when we look at recurrence rates, getting that second injury, going back sooner than 8 months has a much higher risk than waiting at least 9 months. So in the preseason, I don't think we're going to see him in the preseason. I don't see any reason why somebody that good needs to play in the preseason. But I think it's a reasonable assumption to think that if everything goes well in his next appointment and his last little bit of rehab, that we could see him from opening day.
A little bit of a curveball for you, Doc. J.J. McCarthy, quarterback from Minnesota. It's been announced that he's got a torn meniscus, and he's debating or weighing his surgical options. With a young player like McCarthy, what determines whether or not he does the trim of the meniscus or the straight-up repair?
So it really has less to do with how old he is and more where that tear is. So if the tear extends all the way to the periphery or to the outside of the meniscus where there's a good blood supply, or it's a really big piece of the meniscus, they're more likely to do a repair. If it's a small piece that doesn't really have a good blood supply, it's just on the inside of the meniscus where it's really thin, they'll just do a cleanup. Typically, when we do these surgeries, we're really looking at preserving, not only getting them back on the field at some point, but realistically being able to have a healthy, stable knee for year 2, 3, 4, and 5. So my guess is they will be conservative, and if they can fix it, they can. But we've seen what happens with that with James Wiseman, right? You go in to fix a meniscus, you try, the knee never quite is perfect again, and it may lead to just surgery after surgery. So it's not an ideal situation. If I'm a Vikings fan, I'm a little bummed today.
Doc, the 49ers are dealing with so many injuries that they had to cancel their joint practices coming up this week with the Saints because they're worried they just simply don't have enough bodies. And you put, an injured group through a grueling set of practices against the New Orleans Saints. You don't want to worsen your injury problem at all. They had 23 players miss practice on Thursday to close out last week's practice sessions. How concerning is this? How rare is this? Is this just something that happens sometimes to football teams in the preseason and you give these players a couple of weeks off and they'll be good to go come week 1? Or are the 49ers already beginning this season from a bad spot with all these injuries they have to overcome so early?
I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think, one, if you're going to get injured, getting injured in the preseason is a lot better time. And we know that injury rates spike in the first 2 to 3 weeks of training camp. That's when we see the most strains and sprains, just because players, even when they're in really good condition, it's different to be in that game shape. I think also when you think about how we report injuries, we're much more conservative and holding players out, really treating preseason like it's a scrimmage more than anything else, and really focusing on the regular season. So it may be 10 years ago, 13 of those players would have played. But now we're listing everybody. We're making sure that anybody who has any ailment is going to sit out. We're going to be extra conservative, which I think is great for the game. I think it's great for the players, but it does lead to these surprising numbers that a quarter of the team is on the injured list. I don't think it's that much of a cause for concern.
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate the optimistic viewpoint, Doc. We appreciate your time as always, and we'll catch up with you next time.
All right. Take care, guys.